What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and welcome back to the Rundown, where I basically give you a no-frills explanation on what's going on when it comes to comic book characters, teams, so on and so forth, in the realm of comics. Now, first things first, is DC Rebirth a reboot? No. Wind the clock back. 1938, Superman first pops up, and everybody's like, oh my God, this is amazing. Bullets are bouncing off of this guy. He's pummeling criminals. He's even killing a few folks. The popularity of Superman gave way to Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, The Flash, Jay Garrick, the Green Lantern, Alan Scott, like an army of superheroes and supervillains in DC Comics, and the world was amazing. Well, the problem with this was that the popularity of superheroes tied directly into World War II. And so once World War II began to come to a close, superhero popularity dropped off entirely, and it was replaced with a popularity in science fiction. So, in 1956, this guy Julius Schwartz comes along, and Julius Schwartz is now the top dog in DC Comics. He's the one running all the editorial shows and all that kind of good stuff. And Julius Schwartz says, you know what? Comic books have been losing popularity for a while, so it's time for us to go ahead and find a way to reinvigorate interest. Cue the very first reboot, kind of, but not really, in the history of DC Comics. Julius Schwartz goes to all the writers and all the editors and says, you know what? Give everybody new origins. At the same time, DC reintroduces the Flash and the Green Lantern. The difference here is that the Flash is now Barry Allen instead of Jay Garrick, and the Green Lantern is Hal Jordan instead of Alan Scott. Well, then fans are sitting around and they're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. If Bruce Wayne is still Batman and Clark Kent is still Superman, Diana Prince is still Wonder Woman, and Arthur Curry is still Aquaman, why have the identities of the Green Lantern and the Flash changed? Well, Julius Schwartz comes along and says, that's a good question. The answer to this question is that this is a new universe. This is a new reality. This is called Earth 1. The universe that you saw before, where Alan Scott was a Green Lantern and Jay Garrick was the Flash, that was called Earth 2. Cue the creation of the multiverse. Fast forward over the course of the next 30 years, and the multiverse expands almost exponentially. There are characters from alternate realities like Power Girl, which is the Earth 2 Supergirl. There's all these different versions of characters. Well, the problem with this was that by this point, the publications are reaching into the hundreds. The multiverse made DC's landscape so convoluted that new fans had no earthly clue on where to start. They literally didn't know what to pick up and read. So in 1985, this guy, Marv Wolfman, comes along and says, stop. Everything stops. We're literally going to reboot it all. Enter Crisis on Infinite Earths. Now, Crisis on Infinite Earths was a great big huge deal because it was the first time that DC had ever officially rebooted its continuity. At this point, there were an infinite number of different Earths, and so the idea was to take all those different Earths, get rid of the characters that weren't popular, keep the characters that were popular, and then reboot all their origins, which is why the term New Earth was originated. It was basically this post-Crisis on Infinite Earths continuity that all these characters existed on a single planet, referred to as New Earth. Now, over the course of the next 20 years, DC had two more major crises. You had Infinite Crisis and you had Final Crisis. To make this easy to understand, Crisis on Infinite Earths got rid of the multiverse. Infinite Crisis brought it back. Final Crisis made the heroes aware of the fact that the multiverse existed. Done and done. That should be pretty easy to understand. But during this 20-year period, if you were reading comic books, there were certain characters that you would come to identify with. If you were reading The Flash, Wally West was the only Flash. Barry Allen died during Crisis on Infinite Earths, and Wally West took his place. Wally West was in the Justice League cartoon show. These were characters that kids had grown up with, the reason being that they were able to identify with these heroes on a personal level. If somebody was running to a circumstance where they were attempting to live up to a legacy of maybe an older brother or an older sibling of some kind, they could identify with Wally West because Wally West was constantly trying to live up to the legacy that was set forward by Barry Allen. But the fact remains that people who were reading comics during this time became extremely attached to those comic book characters. Not only that, you had characters like Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern, who were basically garbage until Jeff Johns took over the title. Once Jeff Johns took over the Green Lantern title, then it was amazing because he basically refreshed everything. Sure, a lot of the history was there, but the difference is that now we had all these different Lantern Corps and we had this great big huge Lantern mythology. It was literally a universe in and of itself. But nonetheless, fast forward to 2011, DC comes along and says, you know what, we're having the same problem that we did with Crisis on Infinite Earths. The multiverse is getting really big, stories are getting convoluted, people don't really know where to start, so let's just reboot it all. The difference here is that almost nobody celebrated a reboot because people were so vocal and they were so attached to their heroes that when New 52 happened, DC got more hatred than they got support. Now, DC tried to correct things. They introduced DCU as a way to basically have creativity over continuity, but the fact remains that when it came to a majority of their readers between the ages of 25 and 44, which is something like 60 or 70% of their reading base if the information from Comics Beat is to be believed, most people hated New 52. And so Jeff Johns, who was basically a comic book fan writing comic books, became the chief creative officer of DC. And one of the first things he did is he said, we need to go back and we need to take what works from both the pre-New 52 and the New 52 continuities and combine them together. Enter DC Rebirth. So the question becomes this: if you're a DC fan, what does this mean for you? Well, it means that if you really liked Terry McGinnis as Batman Beyond, congratulations, he's coming back. If you really want to see the old school Wally West before the New 52, where he was the red-headed Wally West, awesome, he's coming back as well. And in fact, a lot of DC Rebirth centers on him, giving us a tour of everything that's going on. But the most important thing here is that if you're a fan of the Watchmen and you always wanted to see the Watchmen appear in the DC main universe, congratulations, the Watchmen are going to be there. And there's actually this really cool moment where we basically get this information telling us that the Watchmen are watching DC's heroes, and that Dr. Manhattan has a really huge role to play in everything that's been going on. But of course, we'll see that unfold as the series progresses. With that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end. Again, there'll be a full explanation video on DC Rebirth sometime in the next couple days or so once I get it all fleshed out. But for right now, I will catch you guys later. Peace.